Hi there, welcome everybody. I think we're going to get going. If everyone wouldn't mind, please taking a second and silence anything that beeps. I will lead by example. I'm embarrassed to say I'm reading from a piece of paper. I'll do my best. So thank you all for coming out tonight and showing your support for NYC Mesh. Tonight we are addressing the state of the mesh. Whether you're here for the first time or you are well versed in mesh networking, we hope you'll get something useful out of tonight. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Good. Tonight we're going to have, first my name is Jason Howard. I'm a volunteer with NYC Mesh. Tonight we are going to have specs and procedures and lots of details on where we are going, and what we need to do to get there. But first, let's start with the status quo. We all know the big ISPs. They often overcharge and underserve, and it's only something that's more than likely going to get worse. People are unhappy with the status quo, and they're looking for an answer. I know that's why I've sought out NYC Mesh. Maybe we have that answer. Let me share some numbers with you. As of last night on our join form from our website, we'd recorded well over 1,000 join requests. A lot of people are unhappy with the status quo. About 176 of those requests are from users outside of New York City. Even from a distance, people are looking for a better answer, and they want to join the mesh. They want to support the mesh, wherever they are. Nicholas in Switzerland, Eduardo in Brazil, Mike and Nick in Morris County, New Jersey. We've had 7 install requests from California. I don't think we reached that far yet. In San Diego, we've connected Regina, David, and Michael to start their own mesh. Sabas, or Sabas, in Sacramento. In LA, we've connected Eva, Sean, Anna, John, Dane, Lynn, and Vladimir to start the LA mesh. Vic is interested. He goes by Vegas Rock. I guess he does rock in Vegas. Robert in Parker, Colorado, a web developer named Anastasia in Texas. Troy, a pastor in far west Texas. Quentin in Richmond, Virginia. Mark in small town Massachusetts, as he describes it. Jessica in Garrett County, rural Appalachia, complained that they had no connection. They needed to find some connection. Carlos in Phoenix, Harris in Virginia, Alec in Fort Lauderdale, Nicholas and Doug in DC. People are looking for a better answer. Here in New York City, starting in as early as 2015 through this December, over the past 3 years, we've had 743 install requests. 743 in 3 years. And since the recent decision on net neutrality on the 14th of last month, we've had 486 additional requests in less than a month, about 25 days. As of last night, the total requests from our website on our join form were 1,229. Within New York City alone, we've had 1,050. Right now, we have one supernode. That supernode is connected to an internet exchange point, an IXP, bypassing any potentially nasty ISPs. It's connected directly to the backbone of the internet. We call it ingeniously Supernode 1. Until we get more supernodes installed, only roughly 10% of the 1,229 install requests are feasible installs. We're already close to that 10%. We have 90 connected nodes in New York City. With over 1,050 New York City requests, I think it's pretty obvious that we need to expand. We have an answer, but we have work to do. And we have 2 very real bottlenecks. One bottleneck is we need installers. And the second bottleneck is we need money. Pretty obvious. If you want to help us install, please go to our website, nyc.net, and click the Join button. Let us know that you want to help us do installations. If you want to help us raise money, we raise money in the form of monthly subscriptions, $20 each or more if you can. Right now, we are 18 subscriptions away, one less than earlier today. We are 18 subscriptions away from having Supernode 1 completely paid for on a monthly basis. The next step is clear. We get Supernode 1 paid for, and we add other supernodes to other IXPs. We add more supernodes, and NYC Mesh grows. Look at our map, again, on the website. We have lots and lots of dots to connect. Plans already underway for supernodes. There are plans already underway for supernodes in Industry City. For those of you Manhattanites, that's in Brooklyn. Greenpoint, that's also in Brooklyn. The future would be Upper Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. Our model can be sustainable for our current size, but to grow is a very simple equation. More subscriptions equals more supernodes. To subscribe, please go to our website, nycmesh.net/donate. I'm going to say that again. To subscribe, please go to our website, nycmesh.net/donate. The big ISPs often overcharge and underserve, and we have an answer for that. Join us, support us, and help us grow. We're next going to hear from Brian Hall. Thank you.
Hi, welcome everybody. This is by far our biggest meetup. So in 2017, we got a grant from the Internet Society for $30,000, and this enabled us to pay for the first supernode, and it's been paying the rent there ever since. And we've been pretty frugal, so we actually had money left over at the end of the year, and ISOC has given us a 6-month extension to spend the rest of the money. So there's a lot of new people here tonight, so I thought I would begin by describing what we are. So we're a community-owned network. There's no central ownership. People own the routers on their rooftops. And our network is open, and anyone is free to join it as long as they leave the network open and extend it to others. And our network is connected to other networks and is part of the internet. That's kind of a theme of this presentation, is network of networks. So this is what a typical install looks like connecting to the Supernode 1. There's a light beam at the top there aimed at the building, and then there's an Ethernet box underneath that where we can run cables down to apartments. So we can do like 5 apartments from one of those Ethernet switches. And then you'll have an indoor router like that inside your apartment. We also try to put a repeater on the roof as well, so we get internet going to buildings in the neighborhood. So there's a nano station underneath the light beam there.
Brian's suggestion, look at that one, then you're speaking into the mic. Every time you turn away from the screen, you stop speaking.
Okay, test 1, 2. And all of those rooftops in Manhattan are aimed at these antennas here on Supernode 1, or the big one at the top there. And we're also, Jason left this out, but we do have a second supernode in Brooklyn. And the point-to-point at the top there connects supernode 1 to supernode 2. So got some arrows there to show you, and that's Jesse on the ladder putting that up. That was an amazing job that Jesse and Zach did, putting this antenna up there. It's huge. It's like it's over 4 feet tall and weighs like 40 pounds. And yeah, it's something I wouldn't do. So the result of all of this, all the rooftops connected and the supernodes, is that we have a network. It's a little bit concentrated around the supernodes. And but once you have a network, you can join with other networks. And all you need to do that is a special number, an ASN. So we paid the $200 or whatever to get the ASN. And now we can join with other networks. And where you join with networks is internet exchange points. And the building that Supernode 1 is in has an internet exchange point, DKIX. And they donated a gigabit connection to us. So that was nice. And through that connection, we automatically get connected to a lot of other big networks. So that cost us nothing. And once you're on an internet exchange, you can peer with other networks. It's a way to connect over software. It's BGP. It's meshing software you can use to connect networks together. So we've peered with lots of networks, including Core Backbone, which sounds pretty serious, and Hurricane Electric, Apple, Google, and a bunch of other people. And that's just a friendly thing to do. You have a network, you want to peer with others because you can share traffic. And it's good for both networks. There's 650,000 routes on the internet. And so we can't peer with everybody. And for that we use, we've got donated default route from packet.net and recently WebAir. So that gives us routes to the rest of the internet. So our bandwidth cost so far is 0, and but it costs us to be inside the building. The building's owned by basically a real estate company, and they charge rent for space in the building. So that's our total recurring monthly cost is just for rent. And you might be wondering, why all these networks joining together and going to all this trouble, and what is the result of all of this? So a network of networks is called the internet. So basically, we're on the internet now by doing this, by joining all the networks together. And you also might be wondering, what about Time Warner Cable and Spectrum and all these things? Yeah, we've bypassed them, so we don't rely on an ISP to get our connection. So, the internet is a network of networks. That's how it began, by organizations getting together and just connecting their networks for no charge. And this is still basically true. This is what the internet is. And lots of people will try and get between you and the internet and charge you and collect all your data and slow your connection down. When you get those tiered connections, there's no reason. You could all be getting the fast connection there. Anyway, we're getting back to the original idea of the internet by bypassing these ISPs. So one thing we've been trying to do for a long time is work with the city. There's the NYCHA buildings. We'd love to get access into those buildings and get the rooftops as well. And we haven't really got that far, but what we're doing now is filling in, doing it the normal way, is filling in requests for proposals and RFIs. And so we did it's called the Governor's Island Challenge. So we submitted to that, and we've made it through round 2 of that, and we should find out soon whether we've got to whether we're a finalist in that Governor's Island Challenge. It's a really big project to put. I don't know if you've been to Governor's Island. It's a big island, and they want Wi-Fi across the whole island. So there's a chance we might be doing that. And we're also on a request for information on a citywide broadband deployment thing for the city. So hopefully we might get something with that as well. To me, the most important thing about a network is it's reliable. Like, it's completely useless if it's not. And Supernode 1, I've been using it since January of last year. It's a year now I've been using it, and it's way more reliable than Time Warner Cable. And my Netflix doesn't buffer, and tech support's good. Yeah, so yeah, we're way better than Time Warner Cable, but that's a pretty low bar. So what we want to do is get back to how reliable a landline used to be, where they would try and get it working for 99.999% of the time. So the way we can do that is having failover. Like, if the connection fails, it can go to other gateways. And we can also have battery backups. And Zach's going to go into more of the details about how we can get this reliability up. So this is me signing off Time Warner. I did that in April. I kept it for a few months, but then I realized that there wasn't any point. So yeah, we concentrated around these 2 supernodes, and we really want to spread across the city. So we've just got to duplicate what we've done in these 2 supernodes. We've got a new hub in the Bronx we're working on. It's Richard here. And a planned hub or supernode in Greenpoint, and another one in Industry City. So that's for the immediate future. We want to try and do these pretty quickly. This is something Jason was talking about. When I first started researching about mesh networks, there was basically one other one in this country, Red Hook Wi-Fi, and Dabriah's here, and this was an inspiration for us. It survived the hurricane. It was still working through Hurricane Sandy, and but the rest of the country, it was just all these abandoned attempts at doing a mesh network, and I started looking overseas and found a network in Spain, Guifi, which is huge, over 30,000 nodes, and but a lot of the documentation is in Catalan. It's not even in Spanish, and there was very little evidence of mesh networks in the English-speaking world. So I really wanted to document what we were doing so for English-speaking people to be able to duplicate what we're doing, and it's starting to have quite an impact. Our documentation. It's a network in Honolulu, New Hampshire, both inspired by our documentation. As Jason mentioned, the LA Mesh first meetup was a little while ago. I actually Skyped into that. I was said hello to them from New York. And yeah, but there's so many people writing to us now, trying to start mesh networks in their own communities. An ongoing thing, like mesh networks are decentralized, but we're decentralized on every level. Like, we want to decentralize the people and the knowledge, and but what I found is that you've got to keep working at this. Certain people tend to become too important and have too much knowledge, and we've got to make sure everybody documents what they're doing so other people can do it. Another important thing with decentralizing is we have this Network Commons license, which you might know about open source software, and that all resulted from the open source license, and which allows you to use the software as long as you never turn it into closed source software again. So we have this Network Commons license, which is a similar thing. You're free to join and extend our open network, but you must leave it open for others to join. And this license means that there can be a lot of experimentation. Businesses can join our mesh, and people can experiment with different ways of organizing, cooperatives or whatever. And all they have to do is obey the Network Commons license, and everything's fine. So Supernode 2 kind of arose independently with Sever and Jesse working on it, and this is a great thing, and 'cause that allows us to expand so much faster if this can happen without us having to work on it. So the Network Commons license keeps everybody honest. It's on our website too. So Jason covered a bit of this as well. That number's down to 18 now, so we only need 18 more subscriptions. And one of the reasons that we can do so much with $30,000 is that none of that money goes for employees. Everyone's volunteers, so there's a huge amount of hours that are being put in from volunteers. And if you do donate, the money is going directly towards paying for installs and supernodes. I keep a graph of how many people join, fill in our join form. This is for the last 3 years. And you can see it started to pick up at the end in November. And in 2015, we got a lot of publicity, so you got these peaks. But everything kind of changed in December, and this is what the graph looks like now. So we've basically increased by an order of magnitude, and so we've got to do everything at 10 to 20 times what we were doing a few weeks ago. We've got to bring up the install rate. It's I've been trying hard to get the install rate up. We're about three, maybe 4 a week now, but we need to get it up to more like 10 or 20 a week. A lot of the recent ones have been DIY because we've been so busy, so people have been doing it themselves, and this is great. We try and document how to do that, and I'm trying to make the documentation really detailed and easy if you can follow technical things. The Supernode install rate is about 1 per year, so we've got to get that way up. I'd like to do like 1 per month, and we need between 20 and 50 Supernodes to cover the whole city. This is something that Zach will get into later. And we've got to get a ticketing system. The email's crazy. We've got Lisa's going to talk about, we've got a new page for volunteers too, just /help. So the reason probably for the big increase in December was net neutrality. We're neutral, and we always will be, no matter what the laws are or what the ISPs are doing. We're always going to be neutral. And this is this is what can happen if you don't have a neutral network. This is a Portuguese data plan. They've just divided their data into different apps: messaging, social, video, music. I mean, it's terrible. So we sort of arose from the New York City tech community. So, but we need, you know, you do pretty well with tech jobs in New York City. We need to bring the mesh to the rest of the city, and I think we have an obligation to do that. And two organizations that we can definitely learn from and share skills with are Red Hook Wi-Fi, which, yeah, as I was saying, is one of the only mesh networks when we started, and Silicon Harlem. Clayton will be talking a bit about that later. Thank you. And this is Lisa will talk to you now.
How do I refresh this? Because I updated it.
It should have updated by itself. We're just going to check if we're on the internet here. Which slide did you update?
This one. My cover slide is up. If you like, can you click refresh? Will that refresh it? Oh, it doesn't. And I'm going to delay yes.
Yes.
I updated quite a few slides.
Mm-hmm.
I updated quite a few. Do you want me to use my computer?
No, just hang on a second and we'll reload the slides. It's not doing it, is it?
I think that's it. That happened to me. It won't take you there because it's like popping up. So if we go back to my slides. Perfect. That's good. That's it. Suction up.
Joly?
Awesome. Can I do? That's not going to show up. Oh, it's going to show up if I click notes.
No.
Dang it, it does. Is there a way to extend it?
No.
No? Okay. That's fine. I think I can do without it. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Hi. My name's Lisa Lee. I'm a volunteer as well with NYC Mesh.
And most of my time with the organization has been dedicated to outreach. And with outreach, we've came a long way. And I'm going to just go over quickly some neighborhoods that are on net. And it started off a lot with cold calling, knocking on doors, even just begging people to join the network back in 2016. We even offered to give people free antennas, like we offered a community center in Chinatown that we'd connect them for free. And it's been a journey. I do have to say that, and Brian also touched a little bit on it. Since December, we've had an uptick of interest, and in general, the meetups have been great as well. People have taken knowledge back to their apartment buildings and participated in the network. So over the last couple of months, we've had a lot of media coverage. We think it's because of net neutrality. I mean, just look at the headlines, right? Is it time to build your own internet? So that's great. And I think CBC is here tonight. Yes? Yes. So media coverage has gone up kind of organically, also through social media. Twitter followers and activity on Twitter has increased tremendously over the last couple of months as well. And also, the past year, outreach team has worked on putting together resources because we want to not only just make this easy and accessible, the network that is, we don't want to just make the network accessible to everyone, but also so that you can get your neighbors involved as well, in a way, your non-technical neighbors involved in a way that they feel comfortable, putting up an antenna and participating in this network. So our team has worked hard on putting together brochures, postcards, handouts. In the last year, we've done a number of building installs. And so with that, we've printed out one-pagers or quick flyers that we've slipped under doors so that your neighbors know that you have an antenna up and they can join the network. We've also put together a template if you decide that you want to approach your landlord or your building management company. Some people do, some people don't. I'm not trying to tell you which is the best way, but if that's the path that you want to go, there's a template online as well where you can pull it, you can download it, populate it with what's relevant, but it pretty much answers the who, what, where, how, and the benefit to the building and to the building management. It pretty much sells it for you. So that's available as well, and it's all available on nycmesh.net/leaflet. And then I also just want to share very briefly how one volunteer kind of took this information and went back to his community, just so you have an idea on how you can be a part of the network. So pretend, and this is a true story, one of our volunteers lives on West Broadway in the Chinatown area, and he's a resident of, I think, like 10 different apartments in one building. It's a walk-up, and he identified that he has direct line of sight to the downtown supernode, also known as the Verizon building, 375 Pearl Street. So he purchased the equipment, followed the instructions very closely, because you need to. When it says wait 10 seconds, wait 10 seconds. And that was something that he learned while doing the install. So we're kind of putting together this case study as well so that you can just pull it off online, read it, and that was what he learned, and he shared it with us. So anyway, so he comes online, and then he invited his neighbors to participate, and some of his neighbors don't speak English, so that was interesting for him. But other neighbors who have been there for some time was also very keen to join. So that required them to purchase their own equipment, and he helped them get online. But I do have to be honest, and he was honest with us, that his concern before he shared it with his neighbors was that he didn't want to be the go-to person. He didn't want to be the person that you like knocked on the door if the network were to go down and he wasn't available because he went out of town. It hasn't happened yet. So, but that was something that came up as he was doing this and he was just learning about it. But that's something to consider too if you're bringing it back to your network. However, I think we're coming up with solutions to overcome this, like a troubleshooting solution, I think. Maybe somebody else can address that. I just want to be transparent. So let's grow the network together, right? It's important to add people to the mesh because, as Brian had explained, what is the internet? It's a network of networks. But it's also important to grow our support base, and Brian also touched on it, that we have a page set up, nycmesh.net/help. We need help with grant writing, an install team, a dedicated install team, and excited people who want to go on top of roofs, and neighborhood organizers, an outreach team to help put together outreach materials, and also if you want to go back to the days of cold calling, you're welcome to help with that too. But aside from getting more volunteers to participate and helping us spread the word, our outreach priorities this year will be to host a knowledge share with Clayton, Silicon Harlem, and Dabriah with Red Hook Wi-Fi. We think that there's a lot to learn from the existing Wi-Fi projects in New York, and that's coming up. We have it tentatively planned for either February or March, so look out on our meetup page. And then we're also creating more self-help materials so that you can run your install team, because as the team had pointed out, the list is large. We have a ton of people who are requesting it, but this is also very do-it-yourself, and we're trying to put it in ways that you can just look at and follow the steps. And then we'll also be tabling at B-Sides NYC. It's a conference, it's an information security conference in New York City in January, next weekend actually, and a few more shows in our calendar, if you want to call it that, in the summer. But if anything comes up, we generally get kind of like invites that come to us, but if you have ideas, we'd love to hear your ideas as well, and we would love to show up at events. And then on our wish list, we would, if you speak Chinese, and can translate some of our brochures into Mandarin and Cantonese for free, it's on our wish list. The Supernode has great what of sight to the Chinatown community, and it's been a challenge for us to kind of build that trust with the community and also explain what we're working on with that community. So translated training materials would be very helpful, but also creating an animation if anybody has any of those skills to help us with putting together some sort of video. That's on our reach list. We've been looking for somebody since 2016. Next I want to bring up Dabriah with Red Hook Initiative to talk a little bit about their project.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. How are you? You guys are good? Welcome to Brooklyn for those of you who are not from here. I am from Red Hook Wi-Fi, and that's a project of the Red Hook Initiative down in Red Hook. And we have another community-owned mesh network that we're really excited about and everything that I'm going to just let you know about tonight. So, in 2012, my organization, which is a youth development organization, not an ISP, not a tech organization, had this idea. They wanted to build a network, right? And they wanted to do that because in Red Hook, although it's this pretty popular place and, you know, a lot of rich people live there now, supposedly, there is in the middle of Red Hook, the public housing complex. And here we have about 10,000 residents, and there was a study done within the projects that found, or in the housing, the public housing, which found that a lot of people didn't have access to the internet because it costs a lot, right? So if I have to choose between $50 a month for internet or food or childcare or any of those things that are necessities, I'm probably going to pay for those necessities. So what we had were, people who couldn't apply to jobs. We had young people who couldn't do their homework because, work is now being moved to the internet. So yeah, my organization, this is before I got there, wanted to do something about it. So they went out and they found partners to help them build this network. And what we have now is a mesh network that's relatively small. We have about 15 hotspots throughout the community. And these hotspots were actually installed and maintained by young adults from the community. So it was a great idea, and it's something that has carried us a long way. But I always find it interesting that it was a case of building something you need before you know you need it. So this was prior to Hurricane Sandy, right? And they just wanted a network. So they put up a few nodes, and that was fine. But these nodes end up becoming a saving grace for this community. Because when Sandy came through and the floodwaters were up to about 5 feet coming from the East River into our community, everything failed, right? Including Time Warner and Verizon. But this little mesh network that was built by young adults from the community stayed up. And it was such a popular connection that even FEMA, when they came into the neighborhood, used this connection to orchestrate, the volunteer efforts and recovery and all of that. So it ended up becoming this amazing tool, right? So when we had the opportunity to apply for this grant, we went for it. And now because of this money and because of our history and people seeing that the internet is such an important tool in terms of resilience and recovery, we now have this money to expand. So we're going from about 15 nodes now to about 48 more throughout Red Hook. So what's going to happen is we'll be on all of the business corridors, and if you've been to Red Hook, what happens is Van Brunt Street is really popular, and that's where we have a lot of our restaurants and things like that. We have a couple of other places along the sides and around the front of the community where we're going to put these nodes in. So I'm excited about that, but one of the things I'm not excited about is that those people I told you about that live in the middle of the community are the ones who will not have access to this because the nodes will be basically around them as opposed to in, like Brian was saying, the NYCHA complex. And that's something we're hoping will change over time, that the city will see the importance of allowing us to put nodes on these buildings because, first of all, they're like awesome real estate when it comes to mesh networking, right? So we really want to get in there. But in addition to it being great locations, then we'd be able to offer the internet to the people who live there. So one of the things I learned during Sandy, right, because I was there on the ground, and I remember looking out the window the night that the water came in. And it was, this is my street. Usually when you look out the window, you just see cars and people. That night when I looked out the window, water was coming down the street like it was a river. And it started to take cars and carry them down the road. And people were like running and trying to get their cars, and they just abandoned them because they start to float away. And it was the scariest thing I had ever seen. And then the next day, and for 12 days after that, I didn't have power or heat or any of those things that we look to really keep us comfortable. And it dawned on me in that moment that it's very, very important to be self-sufficient, right? So I remember me and my colleagues and just people in the neighborhood being very upset. We were so mad. Where's the government? And where's my landlord? And where's this person and that person? And you're supposed to be helping us. And I even apply this to the mesh network now. That's all good, and maybe in some ways we should be able to look to them for help, but we need to move into a space where it's okay to be self-sufficient, and we don't have to look to anyone to help us. Because that's what we did in Red Hook. At first we were all angry and we wanted people to help us, but we rallied together and we were our own recovery. We are the resilience. Right? And then when I look at the mesh network and see the fact that this little network, out of all of the networks that were built, multi-million-dollar networks, our network stayed up. So that just shows the power in taking control into your own hands and saying, you know what? Maybe we did need you at some point, government, but we don't now. We're going to build the things we need. We're going to do what we need to do on our own. And that's what I learned after that horrible experience. And I saw us all coming together and just being like, you know what, we'll be fine. We can do the same thing with this internet, with this mesh network. So one of the things that we've done to make that we're doing during the expansion to make our network more resilient is building these solar panel backup systems, which we put on the roofs, and we connect them to our internet hotspots so that just in case we have an outage, just like we did during Sandy, the sun is going to power our networks. Another way we're making it resilient is by hiring young adults right in the community, because they were the ones who built our network, so why not let them be the ones who are going to maintain the network as well. So we're just really excited about what's going on, and the whole net neutrality shakeup is very upsetting, but I feel like everything we're experiencing right now in terms of the political climate is pushing us to be more self-sufficient. So it hurts sometimes for some of us, and it's scary and upsetting, but we are okay because we can work together to build things like NYC Mesh and Red Hook Wi-Fi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Next, I'd like to bring up Clayton with Silicon Harlem. And I just wanted to close out because my notes are up. Okay.
Well, if you didn't hear her, my name is Clayton Banks. I noticed the Mesh folks have that nice, soft, whispery voice. I'm from Harlem, so that's a little different up there. So Dabriah just gave you what I think is a great description of what both of us do. So I will try not to repeat too much of what she said. I do want to thank the team here that has invited myself to share some of the things we're doing uptown. And I think I just want to sort of look at it from maybe a holistic perspective. So thanks, Brian. And I always thank Joly whenever I come to these events because he's streaming like a madman. So for those who are looking at it on the internet, welcome. For us, and it's really interesting because when I think about uptown, one of the things that, as Dabriah did sort of mention, is one of the things we found out through research, and it's not really that much of a secret, but 40% of our households have no broadband. 40%. Let me see if this is working. 40% of our households don't have broadband in the home. It's not because it's not accessible, but because they can't afford it. They try. They might. I talked to the Spectrum brass. Literally, they flew me out to Denver. I've been up to Connecticut. We've been talking a lot. And yeah, our average bill, Clayton, is $150. I'll tell you right off the bat, that's our average bill. And I said, well, there are people that live in affordable housing. There are people that live in, low-income housing and public housing. And they said to me, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but they said, what's affordable housing? So it lets you know why that can continue. That same 40% can continue because, and by the way, I built my career in telecommunications and worked in the cable industry. And so I'm very familiar with all the way back to the days when we used to call it redlining, and then it became a digital divide, and who knows what it's going to be called in the future. But we do know that it's a for-profit business, and as such, they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that their stockholders are happy. And part of doing that is to ensure that you're getting your CapEx and OpEx covered. And from our perspective, Silicon Harlem, when you think about that, you know, our philosophy is everyone deserves a connection. And oh, by the way, what we don't talk about enough in these meetups is that everything will be connected. So when you look at everyone being connected and everything being connected, I'm not sure if the current structure of telecommunications is going to accommodate that in the appropriate way. So the design that's been talked about tonight, where we're looking at a shared responsibility with the internet, much like it was born to do, is, I think, not only going to happen, but must happen, especially in areas like Upper Manhattan, where so many of our children, and I work 1 block from a Starbucks, and I make it my business to walk by Starbucks around 3:30, 4 o'clock, 1, because I need a pickup, so I got to go get some coffee, but 2, I want to see those kids. And those kids in our neighborhood are sitting around trying to get their homework done on a cell phone. I think there's something wrong with us when we're letting that happen. So when we have these type of solutions where we can actually get internet, 80% of homework requires an internet connection. If you can't do it in your home, you're going to fall behind. We see the numbers. 1 in 3 young black men go to jail. It's not because they're not smart. It's not because they're born criminals. It's because we're not giving them the access and exposure that they appropriately need, like any other child in this country. And I think that, you know, it's this type of solution when we're talking about mesh. Another piece that we have to consider, that when we look at those homes, when I look at those homes uptown, many of them don't even have a computer, a device, even if they're not online, even if they're not subscribing to one of these incumbents. So we not only have to create the ability to get access to people, but we have to find a way to make sure they can have a device in the home that's beyond a cell phone. So we are, Silicon Harlem, proud to be a part of the same movement that Dabriah talked about, which is a New America Foundation movement, where Hurricane Sandy certainly led the way in terms of opening eyes when communications was knocked out, same with 9/11. And we have to now build what we call resiliency, resilient networks. So we're looking at a mesh network, but the mesh network has to be resilient. We can't worry about a neighbor whose router goes down and the whole network goes down. That can't happen. So we not only have to build these things physically, but we have to make sure that we're building them with a level of intelligence so that they don't go down in the event of an emergency or any other reason. So Silicon Harlem is building a network, and we're starting in one of the roughest areas in terms of the community being believing that you're going to do something good for them, which is East Harlem. And so East Harlem sits in a floodplain, essentially. If East River rises, that whole area can be flooded out. So we decided, why don't we not only build this resilient network, but we're going to also build in layers of smart tech as a part of our network, which we think works citywide, perhaps state, and maybe the country, where you're able to, as you've been reading about these fires that are popping up in these MDUs, multiple dwelling units, and these lead paint inside of a lot of these NYCHA buildings, and water leaks all over the place. Many of you probably experienced that in your own buildings. Well, we can resolve a lot of these issues and raise the quality of life. I just read a study today by Ericsson that was talking about speed, right? So mesh to get it to everybody, intelligence to make sure it's working right for everybody and also resilient. But also you're looking at speed. We've got to figure out what Ericsson was figuring out was the faster the speed, the more money people made. You got to read the report. It's a really wild report, but they were making an argument that the faster the speed, and they did a whole map of the country where speeds were throttled down and speeds were higher because some people could afford it, their income rose. So all of this is what I think about as a holistic way. You know, and it has to start and it has to be as accessible to everyone. If that means free, great. If that means $20, whatever. But we got to get it so that it's free. I just wrote a legislation or some legislation for the state to talk about two things, because as much as we want the internet to get to everyone and as much as we want to participate as volunteers and the mesh and all that kind of stuff, the other key or the other component to that you can't separate is digital literacy. You know, and all of us need it, by the way, but especially those who are offline. So we have to now find ways to provide digital literacy to everyone. Because if they don't know what they can do with the internet, they may not get on it even if it is affordable. So we have to do both. So Silicon Harlem is focused, like I said, on a holistic way to approaching this, and there's a lot to say about it, but I know we're all going to keep it moving. I just want to say thank you to these folks. Keep an eye on us. We are deploying this network. We're using smart tech. We want mesh in our neighborhood. We're not, we don't particularly love the incumbents, but we're not necessarily anti-incumbent because they have a lot of infrastructure in our community that we have to deal with. But they know how we are trying to approach the market. The network we're building in East Harlem has nothing to do with them. It's going to be our own independent network, and we hope that we can grow it across the entire footprint. You know, Upper Manhattan, if you didn't know, is 700,000 folks. It's the size of Atlanta. So we've got like a city that we're working with just uptown, similar with downtown. So we would love to have more of you come uptown and visit with us. And one of the hardest pieces that happens with any of these networks is getting buildings, right? It's getting on the buildings. That's a vital piece to any sort of network, whether it's mesh or not. And so the work we've been doing in East Harlem, we've got an entire corridor and several buildings because we gained the trust of the community. And I'll end with this, that there's two things that we really, really have to consider as we move forward with this new era of technology. You're now hearing even Congress talk about infrastructure, and when they talk about infrastructure, they're talking a lot about broadband. We believe that the next generation of technology, especially in broadband and connectivity, must have equity built into it. Our designs and our engineering over the years have always had biases. We've got to get that out of the design for the future so that everyone can benefit. It's too much stress when some people are left behind, no matter who that is, if you're low income or if you're from a certain area or neighborhood or you're just not in the path of success. We've got to get rid of that crap and build networks that are designed for equity. So that's a key thing, I believe, that mesh has the capability of doing, because everyone is treated equally and are tasked to share what they know and all that kind of great values that are being promoted here. So we believe in that. We believe in that, and we believe that what the incumbents have missed the most, which I think is very important for us, is to make sure that the community's voice is involved in whatever we do. If you're going to be a mesh person that is managing a node or doing something, make sure your community is all in, That's what we've been focused on quite a bit. So we are what we call citizen-centric, but we have extreme great technical skills, so we try to combine that to make it a great solution for everybody. Thank you very much. I see, Joly, you're holding your hand up.
Question. Does your network have a name?
It does. So the program is called RISE, R-I-S-E, which has the word resilient in it. And, but our brand, the ultimate brand, which we haven't launched, that's why I'm hesitant to say it, but our consumer-facing brand that goes beyond just the resilient network everywhere we're going to be, connecting people, is called Better Be, which stands for Better Broadband. So I'm glad I got someone in here that likes it. So that's it for me, Brian. Is there anything else that I need to cover outside of the fact that I was hoping there was some beer here? But thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. That was great. Let's see, how to present. Good, so my name is Zach, and I'll be talking to you about the master plan of how we want to expand across the city, what the goals of that are, how that works, which also brings in architecture. And so, we just heard from two people that are from very similar community that we really like them. And, it's always great to hear from people who actually use the network and want to use the network and have similar things. We keep saying that this is for underserved communities and people who don't have connections or have bad connections, but we have good connections, so it's hard to really feel that. So it's nice to hear from people who actually want to use it, and it's always good to hear from happy users when it works. But the key that's been said multiple times tonight is that we need to expand across the city because we have so many more requests now, and we have other areas that we need to get into besides just Lower Manhattan. And so this right here helps us inform and decide and think about how we can do that. And it's not just our plan, but this is just the starting of it at this point. So the master plan is to expand across the city. That's it. It's very simple. And but we want to do it in a way that's community friendly and it's open and pure, rather than just dropping 100 nodes in different buildings and saying, okay, give us money, right? You still get to own your own node. You can expand yourself. You can run a super node. But if we follow the plan, then it works out really nicely, which is what we hope to do. So the background for the master plan is that usually small meshes, a small community will top out around about 30 nodes. It doesn't have to be that. It can be 50, it can be 25, depends on which router you use and the distance and this kind of thing. But it tops out in the double digits. And there's a lot of confusing reasons for why this might be, some of it's protocols and so on. But we want to get bigger than that. 30 is too small for New York City. So we need to design in a way that allows us to expand without continuously redesigning and having to change what's going on every time we want to add more nodes. We can't rely on just one brand of hardware like we do now. We need to have many administrators that may not even agree at times on what they should do in their neighborhoods. And we need to have gateway nodes, access to the internet, that are from many different ISPs or IXPs or other ways to get out of the mesh. Otherwise, it's just the mesh, which is also very useful. And we need to be able to support users from basic users. We need everybody from grandmas and kids all the way up to people who can build their own computers and are willing to run wires and so on. So the internet is a mesh of commercial networks, education networks, and it originally was an education network. And so now, maybe we can model ourselves after the internet. And this graphic, it's really bad, but this graphic here is what we've been using in some of our previous state of the meshes, where we're the box on the side, and we bypass the blue guys on the bottom, which is all the local ISPs. That's the Time Warners and the Fios and everything else. And so we can make something like this as well for our internal mesh for the city. And so we've come up with this idea that we're calling the multi-level mesh, which is not a pyramid scheme, even though it kind of sounds like it. But we promise it's just multiple levels. That's all. It's not infinite levels. But this is not in order to try and, when you hear this initially, you might think that, we're going to be the top level and then you guys are going to be the bottom level. And that's not what it is. It's not in order to try and create tiers or an upper level and a lower level of people who run the network. It's just that we want to create a wider area mesh that connects all the meshes together. And so we want to have the wider mesh that's run by the community. These nodes which don't just go down if your neighbor unplugs the router, right? Something that's community run. And then also have small meshes in areas that are in your local neighborhood where you know what's going on. And then connect them together using express routes, right? Between the different super nodes that we'll talk about in a second. But, the express route, you can use that anecdote in New York because we have express trains, right? Other places don't know what that means. But we want to jump across the city without having to jump through 50 nodes. And so we can learn from what other people are doing. This map is from Guifi, which Brian spoke about as the Spanish network, not Spanish speaking, but in Spain, where they also speak Spanish. But it's a country level mesh. It's a country level mesh. This is in the Catalonia area, and that's thousands of nodes, and you can see that it's not just every node talking to every node. It's small clusters that link together, and this is like the internet. In fact, it is the internet, and so too will we be. So New York City is kind of like a small country. We have 8 or 9 or 15 million people, depending how you look at it. But the neighborhoods also can't see each other, right? There's buildings in the way, there's rivers, there's strange things. You may not know the populations are different. You have different local leaders. Here's 2. I used to live in East Harlem, but I don't know anybody there. But I used to live there for a couple of years. And there's different local issues. You can hire different people in the neighborhood to do different things, but we need to be neighborhood localized as well as across the whole city. And I think that's really the only way we can grow the network successfully without having to either lay down rules from the top down or only be concentrated in a small neighborhood. Therefore, we need to adapt to something that's kind of countrywide in nature, but adapt it for New York City where we have the density. So we don't have to have one connection across 100 miles. We can have several connections across many blocks that are diverse in their neighborhoods, right? And so we plan on the multi-level mesh idea, something like this, where we have different points on the graph where the yellow lines are that are what we're calling supernodes. And it's kind of like the thing that your neighborhood can look up to and get out of the mesh. So if you can see a supernode, great. If not, then you can be a green line and you can connect to one of your neighbors or 2 of your neighbors or 5 of your neighbors. And so, we have red lines, like the green lines are connecting to each other. This red line's right here. This is actually our Chinatown, or our Lower East, or East Village network, East Village, connecting to our first supernode, which is down on the bottom corner. And then we have connections across to Brooklyn that we're working on, or that exist and the top one doesn't. But this is a theoretical map. And so, on the right side, you can see that there's this map of all these potential, this is just a theoretical map of where supernodes could exist across the city and to cover a bunch of different neighborhoods. And this, of course, can change in size depending how big the neighborhoods are. We just laid this out given, how tall buildings are and so on. But with the idea of the supernodes, we can exchange the mesh traffic across different areas, across different neighborhoods through these tall buildings, rather than trying to only be able to see the neighbor's rooftop, which might be quite challenging. And so the supernodes, the concept is simple. They're nodes that connect the neighborhoods to each other. Supernodes connect to other supernodes, and they provide an open, neutral internet connection, which is free, open to the community, hopefully through our public network. And it's standard protocols, right? You can use any hardware that complies with what's going on, as long as it's a nice, tall building everyone can see. But you don't have to go through a supernode. It's not a requirement. This is not a top-down provider, but it brings the network together to be cohesive, adaptable, offline capable. We could lose supernodes and still have other ones that are in their own areas. Or we could even fracture if we really have to. If our community splits for some reason, each mesh is independent. Right now, for example, in the Brooklyn area, we have an internet connection, and in Manhattan, we have an internet connection. They cross internets. If one side goes down, the other one you can pull internet from the other side. But if the connection between Brooklyn and Manhattan goes down, each side functions independently, right? And so in this way, we're a network of networks. Everything is working very nicely where, we can even interconnect with other networks that are in the area, and it can still be NYC Mesh, even though, I personally didn't build the routers. That's fine. It doesn't have to be me. The networks that we have the internal mesh network, which is our combination of supernodes and local meshes in your neighborhood. It's all private addresses. This is where the members connect. This is where you guys connect. This is where I connect. It's offline capable. It's free and open. This is the mesh. That's it. Yes, Joly.
We all know that IPv4 addresses are running out. How do you deal with numbering and addressing?
So the internal mesh network is all private numbers. It's all private v4 and private v6. And some people will say, well, actually a lot of people, and I think this way too, although it's not feasible, that we should just give public addresses to everybody because that's the most internet, that's the most proper way to do it. But as Joly said, there's really no IPv4 available anymore. So we will provide IPv6 everywhere, and we're going to just do private addresses, and the gateways, the supernodes or other nodes, have to convert it to public addresses for the internet. So it's like your home connection, but really big, really, really big. And then we have our public network, which is our community-run internet connection. It's not the only way to get out of the mesh. It's just our most popular and our fastest way to get out. It's all public addresses, and this allows us to do interconnections like connecting to internet exchanges, Google, Cloudflare, YouTube, whatever it is that you connect to. This is how the rest of the world sees the mesh network. It makes us look like a real organization, and that's how we are able to consume things like internet from an ISP, or an IXP rather. And it allows us to consume donated connections. So anyway, we're maintaining this way because it's the most flexible, and it allows the mesh to do whatever it does in the future, as well as now. So why not just connect the public network everywhere? This is kind of what Joly was also asking. The backbone connections, only really serious backbone connections like the IXP connections and from top tier providers allow you to bring your own IP addresses to the network. And so, we can't really take our public network, which connects to all these other organizations, and just plug it into a Verizon Fios connection. It doesn't work that way. So we can still exit through connections like that, but in order to create this nice, high quality, pure, net neutral connection, we're doing this public network. And we can expand the public network across the whole mesh, into different areas. It's just we can't really, in order to make it function well and resilient, we keep them separate, but they use each other, right? So this is also open, pure community network. And so we classify internet into 5 categories. The class 1, and this class isn't like one, you only get some certain type of internet. It's the way we classify them so we don't end up accidentally using a bad connection. So the number 1 is our public network, which is the most open, net neutral we have. And then we have donated connections that are not part of that network, and then following on to lower things like Fios and Time Warner, and eventually connections that we have no control of, and they may be sniffing your traffic, right? So we prefer supernodes first, and the lower quality connections, something we're working on, can be used to jump to the higher quality connection through a VPN or a private thing to make it look like you were part of the mesh, even though you're on a distant link. So some things like this. Are we taking questions now or at the end? Anyone know?
I think at the end.
Yeah, Joly has a. Sorry, we'll get you at the end. Sorry. Okay, great. So it's like a university campus network, but it's open. That's where so all this other technical mumbo jumbo, it's like a university campus. That's what it is that we're building. So some goals and upcoming type things we're looking at: more supernodes, expand the mesh, get everyone on this new architecture that we're talking about, where we have supernodes exiting pure traffic. We have supernodes in different neighborhoods. That way we can continue to expand across the entire city without having to re-architect again. And that way we're very resilient to change. Make everything redundant. We have a few services that are not super redundant right now we need to work on. But we're all spending a lot of time on that. We need to work on better rooftop-to-rooftop connections, being brand agnostic in the hardware. So we're working on that right now. And eventually VPN express routes to get across kiosk connections back into our network. DNS again, full maps of the network that anyone can look at live to see what's going on. And more documentation, do it yourself, self-install, and get installers in there to do this kind of things. So these are some of our goals right now. Anyway, thank you. Thank you. So I'll also give the Supernode 1 update. I forgot to mention in the beginning that I'm the volunteer network engineer for the last year and a half, but I'm not the only one. We have several others. We're going to hear from Jesse about Supernode 2 in a little bit. He's also a network engineer in our network, and we have a couple others. I don't think they're here tonight, but there's a handful of us that are running it, and I'm currently supporting Supernode 1, which is the downtown location. So in review, about 2 years ago, this is what the mesh looked like. It was basically centered around Brian's house with a couple nodes out in Brooklyn, and that was about it. But we needed to grow at that time, And now we have this, you guys are all familiar with our map perhaps. It's at nycmesh.net/map. We have 18, I think it's now 20 since I last edited the slides, rooftops connected to Supernode 1, which is in the left corner. We have approximately 4 second hop connections, and the Supernode 2 link. So Supernode 1 is running quite well in that way. We have usage trending since the last 9 months. In the beginning, it was pretty much the connection was idle almost all the time to the internet exchange. Now we traverse about 25 megabits per second continuously, 100 during bursty times or during busy hours like in the evening and Netflix watching and so on, and at times over 300 megabits per second. This is not what you would get if you speed test. You can get 300 from that at times, but this is continuous use from many users simultaneously in the Lower East Side area. The top one is our daily and 6-hour or 3-hour window moving average, and the lower is just an example of a busy time around 8 or 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. I guess. So it's getting busier. We would expect in this kind of thing to see a continued growth, and so far we have, which is great. Antenna revamp, we replaced the mounting gear on the antennas on our Supernode 1. We had our antenna initially placed about almost 2 years ago, and it was or about 1.5 years ago, it was kind of hanging. And so this also allows us to support the Manhattan-Brooklyn connection. And we replaced some wires that caused an outage at least once. So we're all good now. This is the time lapse of Jesse and I using this crane and this ladder to move the antenna up. I think the entire downtime was maybe a minute or two. And that was about it. So pretty nice. Oop. That's Jesse. Okay. Very good. Our public network is centered also on Supernode 1 right now. Right now we have peering, as Brian mentioned, over the Internet Exchange. In January 2017, we had 6 peers, and we could see about 95 networks on the exchange, and we had 1 upstream transit. This month, we have 14 peers upstream from us, or direct peers. There's 105 networks on the exchange, and I'll give you some more numbers in a minute. We have still 1 upstream, and we have 3 offers on the table for additional transit. And I just received 2 more offers this morning. So people are willing to support us. If you work for a network provider, if you work for a backbone provider, somebody, and you're willing to provide us bandwidth, please write to us, write to peering at nycmesh.net. We're happy to take your connection. So thank you. Just pay for the fiber to get it to us. Or donate. In October, November 2016, this is kind of what the Supernode system looked like. It was basically a home router sitting in a box in a data center, and that was about it. It was a very early setup. It didn't really work. There was a lot of confusion about it. It was less than 100 megabits per second capable. It actually didn't take the connection, so it didn't work. And in a few months' time, we were able to make it functional and achieve still about 100 megabits a second, only support 1 radio on the rooftop. After this, we started throwing a lot of hardware at it, and eventually we came up with this design, which worked. It was a little complicated, is fast, but what we tried to do is we tried to combine legacy components and donated pieces along together with each other so that we could provide kind of the same exact thing we're providing on rooftops. But we also tried to do it in kind of a wispy way, like a wireless internet provider. So that was a little bit challenging, and eventually this also caused a lot of trouble, and it wasn't very flexible. Now what we have is we have a simpler design that's also still fast, and it allows us to be expandable and replicable. So we can take this same design and reproduce it several times. There's also redundant cabling. We don't have redundant routers, but we could. It's just a cost issue. And we have the public network in green on the top and the mesh network on the bottom. And you can see the connection to Supernode 2 on the left-hand side. So what this could do is the yellow network, the mesh network, can continue across many Supernode rooftops across the city, where the downstream network connects to that, the network on the rooftops of smaller houses. And then the public network can continue across other Supernodes if it's possible. And if not, then other networks can be there as well. So we can swap the public network as needed. Okay, and lastly, I'll give you some Supernode 1 numbers. So far, we've been online and continuously online for 406 days. There's 20 rooftops on our system. There's about 668,000 internet routes as of today. 1.2 million paths out of our fiber connection to 105 networks, and we've transferred about 41 terabytes of data to residents, to members so far, and 30 terabytes upload. So quite a bit of transit going on there. So thank you very much. Thank you. We'll take questions at the end so we can keep the flow, but try to remember them. So, sorry. Unless you want to do questions now or no? Okay, Jesse next. Okay, so now we'll hear from Jesse about Supernode 2, and then I think, and then we'll hear from Ron. So. There you are, sir.
Let's see here. Do this. Oh. Is it possible to have the notes as well, or?
You have to do two screens.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll try to freestyle. Okay, so I'm Jesse. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about Supernode 2, kind of how it came to be, what it is, and where we're trying to go with it. So Supernode 2 is a hub node located at English Kills between Williamsburg and Bushwick. And we aim to provide the local area with connectivity to NYC Mesh and the internet. And I kind of just wanted to tell the story of kind of how it got started, how I found out about NYC Mesh. It was, I think, April last year, and I had heard about NYC Mesh and heard about one of their meetups and decided to come check it out. And I met Brian and Zach there and heard, that they had an ASN number, they had IP space, and that it really looked like the real thing. So I was pretty excited, and there was somebody else there at the meetup from my neighborhood in Bushwick, and we promptly agreed after leaving the meetup that we would split the cost of a radio and see if we could connect to Supernode 1. That turned out not to work. We were pretty far away. We climbed up on both of our roofs and tried, didn't quite make it, and realized that we would probably need a second hop if we wanted to pull it off. So there's the excellent map that shows kind of all the node signups, and I started looking at that and found people in my area that looked like they could be probable collaborators, and started emailing them. And I got a lot of no's, or I'm too busy, or I no longer live there, that kind of thing, until this guy, Seva, responded, and he was like, oh, I've been trying to do this for a long time, like, we should talk. So we met up, started prototyping a little bit, and after a few weeks, Seva talked to his friends at this old firehouse across the Metropolitan Avenue Bascule Bridge into donating some roof space. And we built a small network between my house, the firehouse, and his house, and the Aquatorium, which was the hackerspace in the area. And so originally, we at that point at least, we didn't have any connection to Supernode 1. So it was really kind of just a local, very local thing. We were running OSPF, but it worked. And we started to talk to Zach and Brian about how we could connect to Supernode 1. So we kind of kicking around that idea at the time. And I think this is probably June maybe of last year, and we made a little presentation. Neither of us could make it at the time, but I think Zach presented our slides. So that's kind of where we left off last year. And I just kind of wanted to, like tell the history or whatever. Things have changed a little bit since then. So I'll just kind of go over the bits and pieces that make up SuperNode 2 right now, what's changed since then, and kind of like how the pieces fit together and how it works. So the router, obviously, perhaps is the heart and maybe more the brain of the node. It's actually a little bit more than a router. It's a Linux-based machine. So it also is composed of multiple virtual switches called bridges that join together and terminate multiple Ethernet segments that the router or the node is connected to via its radios or the radios at the site. So when a frame comes in that contains an IP packet, the router can look at it, consult its forwarding table, figure out if the destination is on another Ethernet segment, and reframe it and forward it along its way. And the next part are the point-to-point links. And so these are Ethernet segments that are designated to tying together or building a mechanism for our sort of supernode to supernode mesh to run on. So we currently have 2 of those. One to supernode 1, which you heard a little bit about already, and another one to node 354, which is Seva's house. So this is an image from Google Maps of the connection between supernode 1 and supernode 2. It's almost 4-mile link, which is pretty far. You definitely can't see it, the one node from the other, really. And it's connected together by 2 point-to-point radios that are running at 24 gigahertz, and it measures throughput along the link measures somewhere around 650 megabit. So it's pretty good considering the distance. And of course, supernode 1 is directly connected to the internet backbone, as you've heard. The other node that we're connected to is kind of our local exit node. And Zach was explaining how our supernode to supernode mesh protocol, which is BGP, which really is very much like what the real internet looks like, allows us to treat that as our backup internet connection in case the primary link goes down. So that's a much shorter link. It's a little less than a mile. It runs using regular sort of Wi-Fi, or the spectrum that they use is like Wi-Fi. It's 5 gigahertz. And we normally see somewhere between 50 and 100 megabit, sort of depending on, over that link, depending on kind of what time of day it is, how noisy it is, how many people are watching Netflix on their home routers at 5 gigahertz. So the next part of the node component is the point-to-multipoint access. So this is kind of how, in the local area, neighborhood residents can connect to the mesh and to the internet. So these are two radios running at 5 gigahertz. They are connected to 120-degree sector antennas, and this image kind of shows like how those 2 120-degree segments fit together to provide this coverage area. It's probably about a mile, I would say, from our tests that, things work pretty well. Beyond that, if you have really good line of sight, it can work, but it starts to be a little bit of a stretch. So it's not a huge area. We're also using, pretty small radios here, so that could potentially change. But for now, this is kind of what we can serve for the moment. So in order to actually connect to these point-to-multipoint radios, you need a station, and this is an example of the station of a station. And this is myself and Khalil, who's in the audience, testing one out. Thank you for the photo, by the way. Excellent. And here's an example of a deployed station. This is at my house. Definitely don't need the crazy ham experiments definitely not required. So just to kind of reiterate, it's a router, some point-to-point links to connect the different supernodes, point-to-multipoint access points for the local neighborhood. Getting here, even though it seems like it's made up of a relatively small number of components, took a long time and a lot of effort, and we ran into a lot of obstacles along the way. So I thought I would kind of just do a lessons learned section of kind of how we got here, or some of the problems we ran into. So the first thing that happened, I think, was early in the summer, after Seva and I had kind of first gotten the network up and going. We would notice it would go down kind of randomly, and it would go down for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then magically come back up. So this was pretty mysterious to us, and eventually, after going over to the firehouse and talking to people who were living there about it, they were like, oh yeah, like, got pretty hot, and we plugged in an extra AC, and I think that, tripped the circuit breaker. So I can't blame them for, wanting to keep cool during New York summer. So we decided, okay, this is just something we're gonna probably have to put up with. But the node itself should be insulated somehow. So we definitely flirted with some solar ideas. We didn't quite have the money or the experience to put something like that together at the time. So we just decided on a simple solution, a combination of a 12-volt battery and an integrated inverter charger automatic transfer switch to build kind of a DIY UPS system. Works pretty well. If you yank the power cord out, station stays up, which is great. And in the picture, you can see I have a kilowatt attached in line to just kind of double check my math and make sure that it was consuming the amount of power we sort of thought it would. Here it's consuming a little more than it does normally. I think that's probably because I had been testing the station offline, so it's recharging the battery a little bit. But normally we see it consuming around 80 watts. So 80 watts, 20 cents a kilowatt hour figure, 24 hours, 30 days, it works out to a little less than $12 a month. So not too bad. So there were also a lot of hurdles on both sides, kind of getting the radios actually mounted. Supernode 1, you kind of heard about how we had to move the antennas around to actually provide the appropriate structure for mounting the radio. You saw the video that Zach showed earlier. So this is just a shot from during that day. And then on the Supernode 2 side, we had this mast that was donated, and it's composed of 2 telescoping pieces. And it seemed pretty good. It had a little set screw mechanism, but once we got the radio on there and the wind was kind of blowing, we could see that the thing was like really shaking around. So it was definitely not enough. And I thought, okay, cool. Well, we'll just drill some holes in it, tap it, and add some bolts, some regular bolts from the hardware store. No big deal. And I think Mike was with me that day. He came to help, and I think we were in a little bit of a rush because it was maybe getting dark or something. And I totally broke the tap. And I should have known better. I studied industrial design. Our professors definitely beat it into us about how to properly use a tap. You have to back it back out before you go, thread at a time, basically. And I just kind of tried to do it a little too quickly. And then I had the broken tap in there, tried to drill it out, promptly broke 2 more drill bits. It was kind of a disaster. We had to leave it. Luckily, the broken tap extended just enough that we were able to kind of reassemble the thing before it got dark. And it was a mess, but it was okay for the moment. Came back later with punches and had to shatter the tap into multiple pieces to actually get it out. But eventually did do it the right way, took our time, and got these nice set screws in, which hold it in place very nice and firmly. So, another thing we ran into, we got the radio mounted at Supernode 1. We're very proud of our work and everything, only to discover that we had forgotten the password or didn't know the password, and Also, the reset button for the radio just didn't exist or had broken off. So we had this very expensive radio mounted on the tower that we couldn't do anything with. Zach managed to convince the manufacturer to tell us about the region of flash memory where the configuration was stored and the pinout for the serial console. And we were able to, Seva and I were able to build a cable and go over there, climb back up the tower, and from U-boot actually erase that piece of flash and get back into the radio at long last. So that was great. Now we finally had the link up and running, and we promptly began having problems with our router. It would work itself into this bizarre state where the router would be up, it would be powered on, the lights would all be blinking, everything looked good. You could ping it, but it would not pass any traffic. You couldn't get a shell. It was useless. And because it would remain powered up, it sort of meant that somebody actually had to go there and, as one does, unplug it and plug it back in. So that got old really fast. And I kind of wasn't ready to give up and move to another platform. We'd sort of spent a lot of time learning how to configure this particular router. So I just wanted to know, God, what's wrong with this thing? So in order to at least have enough uptime that we could get some help from some other network engineers in the community, and also, at this point, I think I was starting to rely on it as my primary internet connection, so it really needed to be up. I cobbled together this little robot with a Raspberry Pi and a relay that was capable of detecting when the router worked itself into the situation, and it could unplug it and plug it back in for me. So that was nice, but we could never find the problem, or at least we couldn't find it before even this became very frustrating. So we did eventually switch vendors to a different piece of hardware, and we had to learn the new platform, and it was tricky, but it worked, and the new piece of hardware has had us up and running since then. The next problem we ran into after that was during the blizzard. It got really cold and windy, and I think Zach and I were in the middle of looking at something or having some discussion related to the architecture, and this really weird auto negotiation problem started occurring on the interface between the radio and the router, the point-to-point link to SuperNode 1. So auto negotiation is where the Ethernet interface can determine automatically what speed the cable can support. We tried turning that off, but that didn't seem to solve the problem. We tried bonding the radio on one end and the router on the other. We had grounded some of the equipment, but maybe not everything, as well as we should have. And none of that actually seemed to fix the problem. And at this point, I resigned myself to believing that it was, in fact, the cable. And even though it was 8 degrees outside, went up there and ripped out all of the cabling and managed to drag it all inside before my fingers froze, and tested the cable. And sure enough, even though these cables, the cables that we built, do have a connector between the shield and the connector ground, something had obviously broken on this one, or I hadn't made the cable well enough. I'm not sure, but as you can see in the tester, it shows that only one of them is actually connected. So we rebuilt the cable, and I think the lesson there is just you have to be really careful on a long Ethernet run that the cable shield is actually bonded to the connector. Otherwise, you can have these bizarre issues occur at the least appropriate or expected time. So yeah, today, as of a few days ago, basically, things seem to have stabilized. There are a bunch of people in the neighborhood who are now, I think, happily getting at least some internet and access to the mesh. But I think there's definitely more to do. So the first thing is, I would say, more nodes are welcome, right? We have this great link to SuperNode 1. We're really consuming, this isn't a great graph, but we're not consuming much at all. Our average usage is very low. So we have plenty of room. So if you're in the area, definitely talk to us, and we'll be happy to get you hooked up. The next thing is, I think that, as you've heard everybody else talk about, we need more supernodes for this to work well. Yeah, we do have Seva up the street, but as Zach was saying, we do classify kind of the connections that we can get or the exits we can get to the internet. And given that that one is a FiOS connection, we definitely don't prefer it to pure net neutral connectivity. So more supernodes that can give us an alternate path to supernode 1 and to potentially other kind of backbone level connections to the internet would be great. That'll make it more resilient, more robust in the case that one of our links goes down. So we're currently in the middle of exploring a potential link to Greenpoint. Mohammed's going to be helping us experiment with that. So we just got one of the radios up on this side last night, and looking forward to seeing how all that performs soon. And then just the last part, and I think everybody's kind of addressed this pretty well. I think it would be great to be as autonomous as we can, as self-sustaining as we can. And currently there aren't very many of us yet supporting it. It's the node itself. I think it's turned out to be a lot of work, and responding to incidents in a timely fashion is difficult, especially when maybe not everybody can't be around all the time or awake all the time. So some way we can continue to distribute the knowledge and share the workload would be great. Khalil and I have been talking a little bit about how maybe we can try to organize. He had a great meetup recently at his place, and kind of got people together to talk about how we could do that. So yeah, thank you. And
Hi, my name is Ron Suarez. I've been talking with various people at NYC Mesh for some time now about how we could create some training materials. I think there's a huge potential for this, particularly if we put it into a commons and look at it in a similar fashion to the Wikipedia. I think there are multiple places where we can look for financial resources, which is too long a story to go into now, but come to me later if you want to hear about that. I'll be talking with Zach and some others about the upcoming New York City request for information that's due January 19th to see if we can somehow fit an education piece into that. So we need not just tech people, but people who know how to write, people who are good with graphics, people who are good with communicating, because we have people with the deep technical knowledge. The challenge is to create this in a fashion that we can communicate it to others. And my fantasy for the future would be something, well, decentralized, like the whole philosophy of this has been, and decentralized in the form of something along the lines of the Federation of Worker-Owned Cooperatives. And if we could create the technology that we need to build a platform for these training materials, picture something like Uber, only instead of a few people at the top making all the money, imagine if the drivers of Uber had hired software developers to build the software for them. Only instead of Uber drivers, it's installers going up on rooftops where they would be locally owned co-ops. So that's my vision for where this could go. Between now and that vision, there's small practical steps just for NYC Mesh to have better documentation, and that's where we'll be starting. So go to the NYC Mesh site and indicate your interest there. I have a sign-up page at neighborsquad.net, which just says to, fire your ISP and learn to build mesh networks. So you can go to neighborsquad.net and put your email address in, and we use that as one of the ways, other than going to nycmesh.net and indicate your interest there on the contact page.
Great, thank you, Ron. It's good to have outreach and education, and that's how we can grow our installs, right? So now we'll have Q&A. We're all going to answer questions, so feel free to ask aimed at general or any one of us. Sorry, Joly? Oh, yeah. There's going to be a mic that comes around, so raise your hand, and she'll pick you. So go ahead, whoever you'd like to be first.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm curious how you guys deal with peer-to-peer traffic. It's very conceivable to me if I was a member and let's say I was torrenting a Linux distribution for it to absolutely monopolize the entire connection. So I'm curious what your guys' policy is on peer-to-peer networks.
That's a good question. Our policy is that we don't block, filter, monitor anything by anybody on any of our networks. So you can do peer-to-peer because we don't know that you're doing it, right? You shouldn't do anything illegal. Please don't do anything illegal on our network. But if you do, we don't know about it until somebody sends us a notice, which we throw away. So, so don't do that. But if you do, then we're not monitoring it. So now that does raise the question of, yes, it will maybe take a lot of bandwidth from the network. And so, our connections are pretty fast, depending how far away you are. So maybe at some point, if it becomes a problem, you may have to do some kind of QoS and average out what people's fair share is. Today we don't do that because we have excess bandwidth, so there's no reason to limit anybody. And if we ever do any kind of QoS, it's not going to be like you signed up for 10 megabits, you get 10 megabits. It's like if everyone is consuming a lot of bandwidth, everyone else can get at least a little bit in, right? So some kind of fair share type policy. But we don't have that problem today, and it's not even something we're considering, right? So,
Hi. If I understand it correctly, all of your bandwidth is donated by companies. Is that a formal arrangement where companies say we will give you, or is it kind of like, oh, we're going to donate, and if tomorrow we decide we don't want to donate, then we're going to cut you off? Is that, from your perspective, is that sustainable long term? Do you think that down the road, if this explodes and you get lots of members, that you might actually pay for connections to ensure that stability?
Yeah, that's also a great question. Right now we have our public network has one connection to one internet exchange, and when you're on, and it's donated, so they can also decide to charge us, although it's not very expensive if we do get charged. And so when we're on that exchange, we have kind of the right to connect to whoever else is on the exchange, which doesn't provide full internet. It provides whatever is local to the exchange. And a couple companies have handshake agreed to give us this internet connection. So as you said, it's not formal.
It actually is formal.
It's not formal in that like we signed a document and there's like a number where it says $0. It's like.
Oh, there is.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the first I've heard of it. Okay.
For DKICs I signed, and they sent.
Oh yeah, that's for the exchange, but for like PacketNet, there's not.
No.
No. Yeah. So our actual internet transit that is not just a local exchange stuff. That the exchange is free and that's formalized, but maybe in a couple of years they could say, okay, now it's $100 a month, but it's pretty cheap, even if we ever do. But the upstream stuff is a problem. Someday we should buy, if we get enough members, at least a small connection to a good provider, something that's not going to net neutral problem us, right? And then we can also mix that in with our internet, our current internet, and more exchanges would be good, right? So yeah, we should diversify, but that costs, and usually there's only one exchange in the building, so we have to be in more buildings, and that costs. So yeah, that's a concern.
And I kind of want to add to the human side of the companies who are donating. We know Packet pretty well. We know DKICs really well as well. And the discounts that we're getting from the other companies, like the data centers, maybe. Just to add to the human side, like Packet really believes in what we're doing. It's Zach and who's the other? I can't remember the other guy, the big guy who comes to our meetings. Ed? No, that's D-Kicks. The other guy at Packet. The really smart one. Which one? No, not his brother. But his name escapes me. But just to add to the human side of it, like Packet's a great company. They really believe in sharing the internet, and they believe what we're doing as well. And then like D-Kicks is also very community oriented.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. It's very true, and these guys are nice and helpful to us, so I don't think that we're going to have any trouble anytime soon, but someday we may have to spend a little bit of money on some internet, some nice mid-tier, not on the lower bottom corner where it's like not neutral, Yeah, go ahead.
Perhaps I'm missing something, but if I understand correctly, I could ping the broadcast address, read from my ARP, and get a list of IPs on the mesh, and then there's nothing stopping me from doing something malicious to those IPs?
Is that a question?
Yeah. Is there something, or no?
Yeah. So it's true that today our security is not high. We're working on that with the new architecture. One of the pain points of the early 2017 architecture for Supernode 1 is that we put everyone on kind of one giant subnet and just did that. We know that's bad, but that was a way for us to get up and running quickly in one of the earlier designs. Our current new design, which is already implemented in Brooklyn, kind of prevents that. But what we do want to do is have mesh traffic between different people across the whole thing, because it's a mesh. So yes, you will at some point be able to hit people's computers across the mesh. And so you have to make sure your computers are secure, and you have to put maybe a home router in front of it like you would a normal internet connection, or just turn on your firewall. But yeah, that's kind of expected. Although we should do a slightly better job of separating broadcast traffic, and so that viruses don't do things in case people are running Windows and so on. But yeah, that's something we're working on. That's what the new architecture addresses. But you will always be able to hit people's computers across the mesh. Anything you want to add to that?
Hi, my name's Kristen, and I live in a rather tall building in the South Bronx by Yankee Stadium, and I'm on the co-op board. But there, of course, are 6 other people on the co-op board who I would have to convince to let me have access to the roof to the building. But we're in a very unique location that we have line of sight to most of Manhattan and parts of Queens. And what I'd like to know from you guys is, do you have experience dealing with co-ops and co-op boards and getting access to their roof, and also dealing with the, of course, fees associated with running hardware on the roof that uses electricity, even though it is nominally, very inexpensive?
Sure, yeah, the electricity doesn't cost a whole lot, actually, it's like pennies. But in terms of getting roof access, that question comes up quite a bit. Some people just go ahead and put something up there because no one really checks the roof. I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm not saying that's the right way, because like one of the volunteers who went to his roof, he looked up there and he was like, "Wow, there are like a ton of antennas up here. Some are disconnected. Like it's just forgotten." I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, but we do have the template put together, and someone did. Yeah. And someone actually did, so the template came together, this landlord building management template came together because somebody wanted to approach their building management company. And they're part of a campus of like 100, I think, apartments in the Lower East Side. And so he went through the whole process, and I'm just sharing the story. I'm not saying that this won't work for you, but he went through the process with building management, presented to the board, got their buy-in, everyone was very excited, and then something happened and they were like, "Nah, we're not going to do this anymore." So if you need points to bring to the co-op board, the benefits and everything, it's in the template. We're happy to help answer questions as well. But it's really it's tough because you'll get buy-in and then you'll get people who are like, what is this? This is ridiculous. We don't want any more like microwaves or like wireless activity going on. You know, we have to protect our brains and things like that. So you get all sorts of opinions, but I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, we've got a very important node in Chinatown now that is a co-op, and they use that letter from our website /leaflet, and yeah, it took about a year because of all the meetings they've got to have, but we finally got co-op permission, and yeah, that's one of our main rooftops in Chinatown now.
Hey, in terms of expanding like geographically, like covering more area of the city, is the primary way to do that adding more super nodes, or do you think more just interconnections between the smaller nodes is possible, or is the kind of most promising way to do that?
Yeah, we should definitely, so the problem with adding just links between rooftops is that eventually you'll hit that scaling issue of, in the double digits somewhere. And you'll end up having, many hops down the chain, and depending on the radio, you may lose a lot of bandwidth along the way. So the super nodes kind of try to mitigate that by having a giant point in the middle of your neighborhood that you can kind of jump to. So the goal being you only have 1 or 2 hops to the internet, and they're probably good radios instead of just some small rooftop radio. So and being that the signals, even the good signals, only go a couple miles, the 4-mile one is extreme. And it's a $3,000 radio that was donated. Thank you very much. I think the primary way to expand across the city is to put more nodes that you can point to. Rooftop to rooftop is also good, and we should continue to do that as well. But I don't think we would be able to expand rooftop to rooftop up to, say, the Upper East Side or even Midtown. You could do it. It's just as soon as you hit a tall building, it's going to be a problem. There's going to be a lot of running around in circles to try and get where you want to go. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go. What do you guys see as the benefits of like in-mesh kind of data transfer? I'm curious if there's any examples of that are already happening and where you see it going.
I think it's great. People should try and build more services if they can. Right now we have a DNS system inside the mesh, but it's been pretty buggy in the last year, and we're replacing that even as we speak. Just depends how many hours in the evening I have before I fall asleep. I think people should try and build things more locally, and we would love to have it so that if there's no internet connections available anywhere, it just says, you tried to hit Google, sorry, but there's no internet. How about maybe there's a storm, how about one of these local things, local chat or something? So that'd be a great alternative.
In Guifi in Spain, it's over 40% of the traffic is within the network now.
That's great.
So it doesn't even leave.
That's great.
Yeah. Yes. What type of upstream traffic have you guys experienced? Has anyone tried to serve video off of your servers? Off of servers on the network?
So far, nobody has served or hosted any sites on our public connections. As one other guy asked, you can kind of see all the other nodes on the traffic on the local Supernode 1. Supernode 1 right now has very low security, so you could technically host something. But in the new architecture, you'll have to somehow get us to poke a hole through, and that's just because that's the best practice, and in order for the mesh to function the best and not accidentally have malware and that kind of stuff. But yeah, we will support hosting things if you want, and we're not going to block, limit, or anything, or watch the traffic or none of that. And the stats that I showed you, that there's a public stats page which is only an IP address right now. There's no nice DNS name for it, but all of our traffic is, the statistics are just there, and these aren't collected like watching who did what. Is just the cable. It's just the wire, the data on the cable, how much went by. That's it. So yeah, nobody's hosted anything yet, but if they do, that's cool.
Do you, I guess what I would want to know, sort of trying to, I can think of plenty of businesses and plenty of people that live in tall buildings that have roof access, and even people that own the buildings that might be interested in this kind of project. But the piece that I see as being an obstacle to some people that would get involved is just how often am I going to need to let people in and out to maintain this thing? And, you know, how much ongoing maintenance, you know, how many trips a month or a year does it really take to kind of keep this thing running?
I've done so little maintenance on the network. I was expecting it to be a big thing, but I've readjusted antennas because they drift a bit in storms, and we've had no antennas go down. It surprised me how reliable it's all been. And for roof access, we try and get multiple apartments in the one building, so we don't have to go through one person. We really have to do that because people move out and then we lose access to the rooftop. But yeah, I think the gear has become so reliable over the years. I know Jesse's had a lot of problems setting it up, but that's... the actual, like the light beams on your rooftop, they're so reliable.
Pleasantly surprised, I think, because I follow up to write up a story about it so that I can share the story with everyone who visits the website, although the stories aren't up there yet. But the feedback that I've heard is that they've been very pleasantly surprised by the speed and how easy it was to get their antenna up and how they don't need to touch it after it goes up.
Hi. In terms of like contributing to the project, what are some of the areas that you guys need the most help in? Is it mostly like hardware installs or like some kind of firmware development, or like, and how are you guys like tracking this stuff? Or there's like a ticketing system or anything like that?
Well, Lisa was talking about this earlier. I just put up a web page /help for that kind of things. We've got an ongoing problem with firmware. Getting firmware on indoor routers. So if you can help us with that, it would be really good. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah. Everything. That's
everything. But yeah, there's a few specific positions we have on /help. I'm thinking that before we had a general kind of help thing, but I'm thinking more in terms of specific volunteer positions now. So if you go to that page, you'll see them.
Probably our most needed area that we could probably all agree on is installation help, right? Because that's the thing that limits us from being able to scale, right? I mean, would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in order to do that, we have to train installers, which is kind of what Ron was talking about, but that means we need help training people to get people to do stuff. So if you know how to do training, that's great. If you know how to do installs, that's great. And if you can do both, that's even better. And then, of course, firmware is a big problem as well. But.
Yeah. The most important statistic, I think, for us is installs per week.
I just think it'd be really cool to see more development of solutions for the last mile problems, kind of the second level of the mesh, kind of at the neighborhood level for getting from rooftop to rooftop. We have one design right now. We are unable to build it at the moment. It hasn't seen a lot of active development. I think it'd be really cool to see kind of multiple competing designs potentially. Something like that, I think would be great.
And we can totally do that. That's okay to do, by the way. I mean, you know, the idea with the multiple neighborhoods is that each neighborhood can have a different router type or a different mesh type or different rooftop protocol. That's okay. They just hit the super node and then it's still part of the mesh. And as long as you can get into the neighborhood, then you can get around the neighborhood however you do.
Hi, thanks. This is a newbie question. Does SuperNode 1, does it have a directional control? Because I noticed that, you know, the Lower East Side has a network. I'm in the Columbia Street waterfront. There's not many points over there. So I'd like to put some. That's what I'm asking.
It has a 90-degree beam. If you click on the map on the node, you get a quadrant there. Yeah. Yeah.
It's facing north.
Yeah. We had to pick that quadrant because of the buildings, and And that was the only clear 90 degrees we could get.
So additional equipment needs to be put on top for that area to be covered.
Yeah, we'd need more sector antennas to cover more sectors.
Oh, switching it on. There's an online question from Michael Ailing. Zach, when would you envision going with your own dark fiber to connect nodes?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Joly.
When would you go with your own dark fiber, using dark fiber to connect your nodes?
Whenever
the
someone
supernodes?
gives us some.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're happy to use any technology. It doesn't have to be wireless. It's just, we don't happen to have a lot of dark fiber. We know people who do, but it's still expensive. And you have to be in the same building that has the dark fiber that you're ending in. And in the building that it's going to, usually that's a problem to get it in the building. So it's not, we're totally happy to use it. We've investigated it for a few larger buildings, which none of them said yes. But yeah, hand us some and we'll use it.
Okay. If you want to finish Q&A, I did want to say a few words about the Internet Society before everybody leaves. So do we have more questions?
I think there's one right there, but if you want, since you have the mic, if you want to go ahead and do it.
Well, I was going to bring up my laptop and do it, so let's take one last question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead with unless anyone else wants to, maybe one more over there too.
Hi guys. This is a question about the NCL, your license, and its impact on the sustainability of the project. I'm sure I'm assuming the NCL is derived from the new license. I'm just wondering, what you guys think about the eventual popularity of the MIT license, which doesn't require, I guess, share alike, and how your NCL might affect other sub-networks that may want to join up but want to charge a fee, like a bandwidth sharing fee. Do you think the NCL will affect, I guess, the growth of the network, or do you feel like that wouldn't be a problem?
The network commons license is actually based on Guifi's one, and with some help from the Free Software Foundation in Kansas. I only recently realized the kind of parallel with the open source license, like that open software, and we're opening the internet back to people. And I can't really talk. I don't really know about the MIT license you asked about, but it does affect anyone that connects to us. They have to respect this license, and charging for bandwidth, that could be a problem.
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be charging for bandwidth, right? You could get creative and find ways to monetize your offering somehow else, perhaps. I don't know.
Similar to the way businesses build up around Linux.
Yeah, sure. Consulting, installation fee, maintenance package, these kinds of things, I think probably would come off a lot more palatable, probably to most folks at this point.
So, okay. Yep. So, Joly, who is president of ISOC NY, is about to.
He's also juggling video here.
About to tell us a little bit about ISOC NY.
You can give them a round of applause. I'll just get myself going here. Do we have anything? It's all gone to sleep. Oh shit.
All I did was
I've got it plugged in, but I... Oh. Question is which one is which? NEC, LG, I'm trusting that this is LG. I know. Okay, let me try this. So anyway, finally, a word from our sponsor, which I think I have a better mic, so then you have to hear me if I'm on this one. So we are, in fact, the fiscal sponsor of NYC Mesh, and this means that every time that you donate your $20 or whatever, you can ask us for a receipt, or you can just put it on your tax as a tax-deductible donation, because we are a 501c3, and I don't think this was mentioned earlier, that, you know, so if you're paying Spectrum or Verizon, you cannot take it off your tax. With this, you can. This is not looking wonderful. So I'm not gonna take you through which I was just going to briefly show you that you know, we've got a website. We look up ISOC NY. We've got a website, and then we have a notice board. And on this notice board, you'll find not only NYC Mesh, but a bunch of other stuff that we do. For instance, tomorrow we're doing an event on digital preservation with Vint Cerf in DC, but we'll webcast it here. And we're only one of 120, I think it is, chapters of the Global Internet Society. And we're 20 years old. The Global Internet Society is 25 years old. And basically, it has the internet. How many of you have heard of the Internet Society? So there's quite a few of you that haven't. So it's the parent organization of the Internet Engineering Task Force, which sets standards. The kinds of things that we work on are sort of like, moving everybody up to IPv6, routing security, internet governance, but community networking, which is why you're here. Well, we started a project in our Asian Regional Bureau started a project, community networking, in 2010, which extended from India to Bangladesh and then to Nepal. And in fact, when Nepal had the big earthquake, it was our community networking thing that got them going. Maybe some of you read the New York Times, saw this thing last week about them sticking these aerials on top of a mountain in Georgia. That was paid for with the same grant money that pays for NYC Mesh. When we actually put in the application for grant money for NYC Mesh, there was amount of pushback. But what do you need? What do you need it for? We're dealing with all these people that are all over that don't have anything. They're out there, and so we said we have people here that don't have anything, and the fact is that as we're now seeing with the kind of press that NYC Mesh is getting, it's serving as a model for the rest of the world. It's inspiring people around the world, and this is what we very much hoped would happen when the grant money was put through. The Internet Society itself is that we've been pushing the cart up the hill, and now we've got half of the world is connected to the internet. But by the same token, half of the world is not connected to the internet. And so we're looking at it now and saying that basically, as far as that goes, almost with people reaching out, if you don't include, pie in the sky in the form of loon balloons, low Earth orbit satellites and this kind of thing, it's basically up to people to reach those people to reach back out to the internet for themselves via community network initiatives. And it's been a big swing in the internet society to like start putting our weight behind such activity. And so one thing that's just happened is that we have special interest groups, and there are some old ones. The interplanetary special, networking special interest group is one. So now we now just this week formed a community network special interest group, which has people from GWIFI, it has people from Rhizomatica, it has people from Libra Mesh down in Argentina, all coming together in this group. If you're interested in getting into this group, you can join the Internet Society, and then there's a thing where you can say join a chapter or join an interest group, and you just drop down. First you join New York, then after that you can go through and find the community networking special interest group. And there's a thing also which is not mentioned by Brian. I will notice that they have a very active Slack, which you can also join by emailing them. Now, what Judith has asked me to mention is that for the Internet Governance Forum, there is a dynamic coalition on community networking. The Internet Governance Forum is a thing that happens once a year. It's under the auspices of the United Nations. And within this, there is a thing, that we work at the grassroots level, we work at a very high level. At the high level, there is a thing called the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, which the United Nations is going, and so, talking to countries about how, what they're doing for their people. And this is one of the things is that we're talking to them about doing community networks. And one of the things that they want to, that we're saying to them is that, you've got to make regulations at the top that favor this kind of thing. And so an example is if you're giving an exclusive franchise to somebody to run a cell phone network and they lay fiber along all your roads in your country, then insist that they have to make access points on that fiber for people running community networks in that area. And in fact, our CEO went to the Mobile World Congress in Shanghai last year and made a big speech about this to the assembled people. And think globally, but act locally. Now, if you look here right in New York, the franchises for Spectrum, I think for Verizon, are coming up in 2019, just a year away. And they will be renegotiated by the city. And, previously we've negotiated with them, okay, they've got to give public access channels on the TV or whatever. So one of the things that we locally as a chapter are looking at is how can we apply pressure so that they have to give access to community networks like NYC Mesh as part of the conditions for getting their franchises to wire up the city, and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, I suggest you join our chapter, ISOC NY as we're called. And Judith wants the last word here. And Judith is up here from ISOC DC. She's from our DC chapter.
Yeah, okay, so I also wanted to plug in the IGF, the Dynamic Coalition, is free to join. Most of the people who are on this run their own community networks, like Rhizomatica and GWIFI and a whole bunch of others. And they pull together a bunch of resources on how they do things, and also working on energy sustainability issues. And so that's up on they're putting together a website. So there's a whole bunch of web resources that anyone could also freely donate. So I would check them out, and I think the best way of joining the listserv is if you Google the Dynamic Coalition on Community Networks. It's an IGF Dynamic Coalition, and sign up and join them.
Okay, thanks. And I'll tell you what my wish is. My wish is that a huge amount of money lands on NYC Mesh and pays Brian to be executive director, because he works so tirelessly on it. So thank you, Brian, for all you do. And thank you all for coming today.